Hi, everyone. I'm David Oresic. I'm one of the people helping to organize this reading group, but I'm really excited to be presenting tonight, and I'm really excited to see all your smiling faces here on Zoom. First and foremost, just thank you. Thank you so much for making the time. I presume everyone finished their readings and did their homework and is ready for a discussion. So just the first thing I want to say is we're actually pretty floored by how many people signed up for this reading group. When we were originally talking about what we were expecting from this, we were hoping to get, maybe, 10 or 20 people who would want to talk about photography readings on an ongoing basis. And I think we have had nearly 200 people register for the website for the group. So it's just really, really cool to hear that everyone's interested in these topics. So there's a lot of us here, so just bear with us. This is an experiment for us, and we're learning all this Zoom stuff very much, and just appreciate your patience. But on that note, I also wanted to mention, this is a participatory reading group. This is not a lecture. We want to really hear from as many people as possible, questions, comments, your thoughts, and your takes on these readings. So with that in mind, I'll tell you what we're going to try in terms of having somewhat of a cohesive discussion with this many people. So our facilitator for each of these sessions will be different. I'll be your humble master of ceremonies and just try to kind of organize everything and kind of try to keep us on track as much as I can. So Liz Park will facilitate tonight, and I'll introduce her a little bit more in a second. So she's going to open with some initial thoughts on the readings, and she's also the person who put this whole resource binder together. So she'll have a lot of information about kind of some broader thoughts, I think, on the whole project as well. And then what we'd like to do is sort of as a primary outlet or as one outlet to use to sort of share your thoughts and your ideas and your questions on the reading, to use the chat to everyone feature. If there's just something you kind of want to put out there and have people respond to it. But if you'd like to sort of kind of raise your hand to speak, so to speak, or if you have a particular comment or a question, if you message me directly, so if you change the everyone button and you just find David Oresic, I'll kind of try to monitor those comments, and then as people come in, I'll kind of pull those and kind of share them to the group, or just kind of call on you and ask you to read to the group, so we can stay a little bit organized as well on that way. So if that makes sense, that's what we're gonna try. And we're thinking this will go for about an hour and a half. So let's dive in. So our facilitator this week is also, as I said, the person who created this whole resource binder and the exhibition that kind of was thinking through photographs, Liz Park. Liz Park is the curator of exhibitions at the UB Art Galleries in Buffalo. And she was most recently the associate curator of the 2018 Carnegie International at the Carnegie Museum of Art, where I got the pleasure of getting to know Liz and collaborating on some programming with the International. It's just a phenomenal show. And she's curated exhibitions at a wide range of institutions, including the Western Front in Vancouver, the Kitchen in New York City, the Institute of Contemporary Art in Philadelphia. She's written for several publications. Just on a personal note, Liz shared this resource binder with a couple of people at a sort of blast email, and I saw it, and I think my co-curator, Kate, and I were really just blown away at what a interesting and thoughtful and thought-provoking reading list. And our first thought was, well, we're definitely going to steal this reading list for all our courses that we're teaching, because it's such an interesting kind of binder of ideas. And then we were just like, but there's got to be something more that we could do with this to kind of broaden this conversation, and that's what we're doing right now. So I want to say, Liz, thank you so much for developing this resource binder. It's just been a pleasure to engage with, and I'm so excited to engage with it with the group now. So on that note, Liz Park, take it away.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you so much, David. And thanks also to Kate and Leo at Silverai for co-hosting and co-organizing this. And I also want to begin by acknowledging artists and educators Sarah Greenberger Rafferty and Shannon Ebner, who both teach at Pratt's photo program, for seeding the project idea. If you have looked through the PDF, which you see in the shared screen here, I've mentioned this in the PDF that last year in October, they organized a symposium called Teaching Photographs at Pratt, which I wasn't unfortunately able to attend, but was an incredible project that I used to kind of build out thinking through photographs as a discursive exhibition, which would have taken place at UV Art Galleries this summer. But as we were all hunkering down in the face of the global pandemic, I pivoted the content and the research from a gallery display to this online resource binder with the help of a fantastic designer named Chris Lee. And my intention, as David was describing, was to post it online and send it out to some people I know who I had a particular focus or interest in photography so that it can be useful to their work, because this was a time when everyone was scrambling to transition to online learning, and these resources are helpful. And, I really didn't think much beyond that. And I was really glad to hear from David when he approached me about organizing a whole season of reading groups around him. And I'm assuming that you're here also because you found it useful and interesting. And there's an endless amount of materials out there about photography, but as we know, access is not even, and access is also an issue of navigation and organization. So I wanted to do some of that work on behalf of anyone coming into photography as a subject of study, no matter how, no matter your previous knowledge or skill level. I wanted the materials to be succinct and digestible, thought-provoking, but most importantly, I wanted it to be relevant to what's going on today. So in the intro, you can see in my share screen, in the intro, as I note, can you see my cursor? Okay. I write, as imaging technologies evolve, so those are thinking around what we see, everything from a vintage black and white print to an image manipulated on a mobile screen, and how we see. So our first topic today is photographs in 2020. I've crossed out 1829, and I'm sure I got the date wrong, but that's generally when photography is thought to have been invented. And, there's a lot of disagreement among scholars about who invented photography when, but for our purposes, let's say that the invention of photography, was a means, it was a discovery of a means to fix the light onto a surface and create an image of the world onto a surface using these silver particles. And it's an incredible way to make an image, and it was really revolutionary at the beginning of the, not 20th, at the beginning of the 19th century. But as we know, the world has changed many times over since then in big and small ways. And we now have cameras that are on a GoPro or drone. We have cameras on our phones. And we have, we use our phones to upload these photos to social media like Facebook and Instagram. We have tiny cameras that go inside our bodies. We have giant cameras that go out into the space and take pictures light years away. So thinking about how all these technology kind of has gotten to a point where camera can make an image of things that we can't really see in person, what are we to believe of a photo? What are we to think of a photo today in 2020? And how do we see these photos? And it made me think about existing circuits of distribution. Again, the problem of navigation and organization and access. So thinking about these existing circuits of distribution, whether that's news or news on TV or on your phone or a scientific journal or social media, we attach different value systems to these distribution platforms. And we tend to think that a scientific journal offers us truth in ways that we don't expect from social media. But increasingly, we're coming to question these established platforms. For instance, the term fake news has become such a part of our common parlance today. We know that images have been vulnerable to manipulation, but they are becoming so at an increasingly alarming rate. So in this topic, I actually quote from an article from 2007, which feels kind of ancient today, but I still find quite relevant, by the artist and scholar Hito Steyerl, who says who talks about an image as a file, as a digital file, as opposed to a physical object that you can hold in your hands. So she says the poor image has been uploaded, downloaded, shared, reformatted, and re-edited. It transforms quality into accessibility, exhibition value into cult value, films into clips, contemplation into distraction. The image is liberated from the vaults of cinemas and archives and thrust into digital uncertainty at the expense of its own substance. I'm going to point out, our PDF is hyperlinked, so you can click right out to the article online on eFlux. It's a very handy tool. So, her text makes me think about what a poor image is and what it means to defend the poor image. Because when you say the term poor image and say the context of an art class where you're having a crit of students' work, that sounds like such a term of condemnation, but Steyerl is not using that word in a pejorative way. In fact, she is sort of empowering this idea of the poor image, this low quality image that kind of circles the globe in mere seconds. She's celebrating them because these images have the ability to reach people with immediacy in ways that a large file with print quality resolution cannot. One of my favorite parts of her article is this part: the poor image is a rag or a rip, a lumpen proletarian in the class society of appearances, ranked and valued according to its resolution. And I'm actually going to scroll all the way down to the end of this article because I want to get to the crux of this article, which she says is about reality. So she ends her article by saying poor images are ultimately about reality. In arts and culture, yes, there are caretakers, gatekeepers, and I don't mean it in a negative way. Like curators, as curators, we take care of our artists. In the vaults of cinema that she was alluding to, archives and museums where the word quality is sort of held high on a pedestal. That there's a place for that, but she's also talking about how these so-called poor images, they have the ability to cross borders, national, class, and digital boundaries with far more efficiency and ease that other sort of high quality objects cannot. And that is a reality. And in her assessment, this is a really important quality because these poor images, they ultimately offer us a way to talk about class politics and how we deal with these boundaries. So she's providing us with a very useful jumping off point to think through the conditions of not only image production and circulation, but how our world is divided along class lines. We just need to look out the window to see how the pandemic threw into relief a world that is starkly cleaved along class lines, where the wealth is becoming increasingly concentrated and the working poor are struggling for survival. So it becomes all the more important and pressing to ask what makes an image poor, what makes it rich, and how do we value and evaluate a photograph, which are the questions that the first topic asks. And I also want to bring in the second reading, this second reading by Aria, Poor Meme, Rich Meme, which was written 7 years after Hito Steyerl's text, and it directly references Steyerl's ideas. And she uses Steyerl's ideas to think through the meme as a poor image, as a Black image, as something that operates against the rich, full-bodied, high-resolution representation of so-called reality. I'm gonna do a quick find to get me to this part. This is a great thing about readings online. You can just Control F and find the part that you want to find. So, so she quotes Hito Steyerl here. She says, oh, here, a little bit higher up. She says, memes replace the ideology of ownership with another form of value, one that Hito Steyerl argues is defined by velocity, intensity, and spread. In Steyerl's In Defense of Poor Image, a text that might as well be a treatise on the meme, she describes a poor image as a snapshot of the affective condition of the crowd. The condition of the images speaks not only to the countless transfers and reformatting, but also of countless people who cared enough about them to convert them over and over again, to add subtitles, to re-edit or upload them. And I find this idea of a group of people who care so much about an image really compelling as somebody who is in the field of visual arts, and to think about the power of the image in its circulation, in its excess. And both Dean and Steyerl reached a very similar conclusion. And this is the part that I think is really interesting about this particular pair of readings. Is so in Steyerl, let's go up a little bit, where she starts talking about Dziga Vertov, the Soviet filmmaker. So she talks about Dziga Vertov's idea of visual bond. She says this visual bond was, according to Vertov, supposed to link the workers of the world with each other. He imagined a sort of communist visual atomic language that could not only inform or entertain, but also organize viewers. So keep that in mind, and then we'll kind of jump over to Aria Dean, where she talks about, oh, sorry, going the wrong way, where she talks about how the meme is a form that allows for a sense of collective ownership among those who come into contact with it. So this idea of the collectivity here is echoed in Dean's text. But they also kind of find a similar problem, or they are anxious about a similar problem. So Aria Dean down here says, likewise, memes cannot be viewed as objects that once authentically circulate in Black circles for the enjoyment of the Black collective, but instead are always already compromised by the looming presence of the corporate, the capitalist. And that's, again, going back to Steyerl, like that's the same problem that she articulates here. In a sense, his dream has come true, if mostly under the rule of a global information capitalism whose audiences are linked almost in a physical sense by mutual excitement, affective attunement, and anxiety. Having said that, though, they both find potential power in this idea of drawing a collective from the poor image or the poor or the meme. They, you know, they kind of find solace in the very circulation network. They find the potential and the power in the collective that the images create. And again, like going back to this idea of this image that coalesces people, I find so powerful. That's the belief that I have in art and in images as somebody who is in this field. And thinking about this, I selected one image, which is actually 2,000 images in one artwork by an artist named Carmen Wynot. I'm not pronouncing it properly probably, but so this is an artwork by an artist, Carmen Wynot, titled My Birth, that she presented in 2018 at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And this is a collection of images of childbirth. And, you know, you can actually listen to a conversation that she did with Sarah Greenberger Rafferty on the Teaching Photographs Symposium, which she took part in. So going back to here. So, so I'll just kind of quickly describe what this work is. So she has taken, she's kind of cut out and collected these images of women giving birth from primarily 1970s feminist literature, such as Our Bodies and Ourselves, which is a canonical book about women's reproductive health and sexuality. And these images and the literature that carried these images, the books and the journals, was from a time period prior to the internet. But I am choosing this image to bring into our discussion as a contemporary artwork that is sort of influenced by how we are looking at images, but looking back at a different time period, where this really was meant to, the feminist literature at the time was meant to empower women through circulating information through these images. So I think of this as the Vertovian sense of visual bond, or the sense of collective ownership of the female body in the way that Aria Dean talks about it. And I'll just scroll down to where the artist says there's so much deaccession material now. The digital world is expanding and the analog world is contracting. So I wanted to bring it back to this relationship between the digital world and reality, where my experience of this piece in reality was really powerful, because it, you know, at a museum like MoMA, where there's a lot of people coming through, I saw that this piece, it was really fascinating to observe how people would stop dead in their tracks and put their faces really close to these tiny images of vagina with babies coming out of it. And, you know, it was a really incredible experience of being fascinated, disgusted, marveling, and kind of convulsing, awed, all at the same time, united in this experience of birth, which we have all gone through as infants. Some of us get to experience it as, or have experienced it as mothers. You know, there's a lot more to say, but, you know, I'm actually going to just park it there at this image of a viewer contemplating the work. And in the spirit of this collective building that I was talking about through both Steyerl and Dean, I wanted to pass off the baton to two of my co-organizers from UB Art Galleries, Emily Reynolds, who's a marketing manager, and Jill Daniels, our student curatorial assistant, who have been instrumental in organizing this reading group. And I wanted to give them the platform to bring in an image each, so that we can think through those images as well as we are discussing the readings. So Emily, on to you.
Yeah. Can you pull mine up? Thank you. So when I was reading these pieces, was reminded of one of my favorite moments in 2015, the moment of Dressgate. If you were not around or not paying attention to memes in 2015, this image took the internet by storm because it was unclear what color it was. So originally this image was taken by a mother who was shopping for a dress to wear to her daughter's wedding. And she sent this image to her daughter as maybe I'll wear this. And her daughter was like, you can't wear a gold and white dress to my wedding. And the mom was like, that's not what color it is. And they posted it online, and quickly it became a sort of like global sensation of the debate about what color this dress is. It is an actual dress and it is an actual color. But I think what's really interesting here is how this image doesn't work. Like, it is truly a poor image in that it does not actually communicate the information that it needs to, which is what color it is. And that was really interesting to me. And then the way it becomes a meme and it becomes this debate that people, talked about for days. It divided families, it divided offices, it divided people's lives. What color was this? It was so crazy. And then it's also really interesting because the design of the dress sort of reinforces all of that, because it's kind of a knockoff of a very popular style of dress at that time, which was the bandage dress that was popularized by a French designer. And then sort of over the next couple of years trickled down into fast fashion world. And so I thought that this would be a really interesting image to talk about in relation to these readings. And I won't take up any more time. I'll let Jill go.
Hello, everybody. Today I am going to be talking to you all about a icon, a trendsetter, a kind of cultural revolution in herself, Kim Kardashian West. So in this Instagram story taken on April 30th of this year, she applies lip gloss to demonstrate the quality of the product as a brand owner. And she has released other story video posts, and in one of them she was demonstrating body makeup with her makeup artist applying a cream-based product in this rich brown shade that it appears in the tube, but shears out to a light brown tint. When looking at the current photo that we see before us, we can make the assumption that she did not apply her body makeup to her hand. And there are two main focal points in this image. One, her hand, out of focus and blurry when contrasted to her face, and two, her face, more specifically her T-zone and lips. Now, KKW's face is framed by her long, dark hair and eyebrows. We can see that there are two main color palettes being used in this photo, as well as the dark browns, blacks, and taupes of KKW's face, neck, and hair, and clothing contrast with the cool tints of white and soft pink seen in the background, lip gloss wand, and most notably her hand. And this image is combined with the text, "Don't judge me for my pale hands," and a descriptor of her product, Soulmate Lip Gloss, in the center to make it juicy. Shows that there is an awareness that this image alone would cause controversy due to recent phenomena of online blackfishing and blackface, a controversy that Kim herself is not unfamiliar with. Now, does this leave the question as to why she would choose to utilize this particular image to represent herself and her brand? Let's take a closer look. The image itself is not of poor quality. In fact, we can consider this image to be digitally rich in quality and resolution, crafted with the intention and released for millions of people to view. The framing of the subject is done well and abides by the rule of thirds with the eyes, lips, and hands. The subjects, KKW and the lip gloss, is clearly and fully within the frame, and there is a clear caption referencing the action. This is a carefully crafted image that we can define as rich. I believe that this is when we can look inward to Aria Dean's poor meme, rich meme, in which Dean similarly categorizes how Blackness functions in the digital space and the relationship between the physicality of Blackness and the internet. The internet, which was advertised as a way to free us from our bodies, has merely confused our limits and identifications, providing just enough flexibility to, in artist King Townsend Obadek's word, make the same old burnt cork blackface routine easier. This carefully crafted reality presented to us by KKW is incidentally and unintentionally broken by KKW. There is a strange irony in this. She is not only a real person with real feelings and emotions that should be considered when holding conversations in a space like this, but she is also a very carefully crafted persona that has enormous social capital in our current person reality. So much so that she was able to gain a personal audience with the President of the United States. She is fully aware of the type of content that she's putting out into the world, especially if it is coming from one of her official accounts. What she chooses to place on her platforms for public consumption has a great impact on what large aspect of the social culture and us places value in. What she has promoted in her previous post on Instagram is a way to obtain a facsimile of Blackness packaged and advertised as a way to combat paleness. But why would she and the consumers that might be interested in this product want to combat paleness? What is it about paleness that has fallen out of the mainstream? Just as this image is rich in quality, it is poor in social interpretation and context. KKW has long built a representation of being equally a successful businesswoman, a cultural standard for beauty and fashion, and someone who can utilize the sway of public opinion to create and reinforce a very specific standard of beauty. KKW gives and designates values by starting and sustaining trends in fashion, beauty, culture, and even physical appearance. She has been called in before about previous instances ranging from taking aspects of different cultures and identities to what some would call digital blackface. However, what is most notable to me is that this is not a case of digital manipulation of an image, because Kim Kardashian West did not alter the image in any shape or way besides adding text, but she captures an honest representation of an altered reality as we can see it in the presented photo. The image shifts from being exclusively a rich image in regards to the conventions of photography, product advertising, and dissemination. It becomes poor and contentious when introduced with past instances of racial insensitivity on a wider social scale, both online and in person. I'll leave you with a quote from topic 1. The poor image is no longer about the real thing, the originality original. Instead, it is about its own real conditions of existence: swarm circulation, digital desperation, fractured and flexible temporalities. It is about defiance and appropriation, just as it is about conformism and exploitation. In short, it's about reality. Thank you.
All right, so thank you, Liz. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Jill. I think this is a really great place to set us up for this topic. So again, feel free to engage with the chat or message me directly if you want me to introduce your comment, and we'll kind of unmute you and go from there. But I think maybe to start off, and maybe Liz, I'll sort of frame this question to you, but anyone feel free to jump into it. I think between the two articles, between these 3 examples, the thing I've been thinking about this idea of the poor image and about memes comes kind of in 2 tracks. And I think it's really well illustrated by the Winnet piece that Liz shared and the dress piece in this KKW kind of Instagram story, which is how much these things have changed in the 11 years since the Steyerl article, right? She's sort of writing about bootlegging video art pieces for museums, and what Steyerl's writing about seems to be more about kind of zine culture and something that's a little bit gritty and underground, and is more widely disseminated. Like, it starts with a really niche thing and it sort of more widely disseminates it, but it's not that widely disseminated. And Dean and meme culture is a huge dissemination, right? Where, you know, it's millions of people. In the case of something like this Kim Kardashian West meme, which seems to be, you know, the 2 arguments you sort of pointed out how much they had in common, but in the sort of intervening years, and it's only been a few years since these articles were written, there's some major divergences in that I think perhaps are due to technology, but maybe I'm thinking about it wrong. I don't know. What do you think, Liz?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because for me, you know, I'm thinking about this, like kind of the collective that the image fosters and builds and coalesces, and you know, you have different ways to reach that with different kinds of platforms. So everything from you know, film that gets presented at a museum to this feminist literature that goes hand to hand from one woman to another in the 70s, and to, you know, Jill's example of, Kim Kardashian West, who actually has more followers than the current president of the United States, or I actually looked up like the followers of various Instagram figures, including politicians and celebrities, and by far, somebody like Kim Kardashian West has reached that no politician has. And to think about like these ways in which we have been able to kind of coalesce people, it's mind-blowing that it's with every, I guess, development and technology, it's kind of like this concentric circles that kind of get larger and larger. And but I think within that there's pitfalls to all of these, right? Like there's sure, you might have 1 million followers, but that's not necessarily a community of people looking at an image.
Mm-hmm.
That's not necessarily this visual bond. Yes, you might be looking at the same thing, but like I don't think that is what Vertov imagined would be the visual bond, right? So I think this discrepancy between the digital world where you think you have thousands of friends, but who are your friends in reality? I don't know. Like that kind of gap between what is presented on screen and how it is in reality. I think that is the point at which artists are good at inserting themselves, and that is the point at which we, as in people who are invested in looking at images, making images, circulating images, should be paying attention to.
Mm. Do you think for Steyerl's or Dean's sort of point to sort of land the creation of that visual bond is like essential for it to sort of qualify as this category of image she's talking about, right? Right, like if the Kim Kardashian West is more of a advertisement, albeit with some interesting controversies about it, could it perhaps not fit in this category? Or like because I don't know, like, and maybe this is a different conversation, but like I've also noticed like a lot of meme culture being absorbed into just straight advertisements. Do advertisements get to be poor images?
Yeah, that's a very interesting image, or that's a very interesting question. Maybe I will maybe add an additional question and pass it off to somebody else to kind of jump in, because my question is, what is the job of an image, right? And I guess that changes from image to image, because I was struck by how Emily said it truly is a poor image in that it wasn't doing its job, the dress. but so, okay, its job was to like communicate something about this stress, but it ended up having the side career, a very successful career in the internet world of, engaging with so many more people than it had intended to. So what is the job of an image? Leo, I think, yeah, go ahead.
I think something very powerful that comes through Aria Dean's piece is that there's no real intention behind this coalescing and circulation of memes, that it's almost like weather phenomenon, that you see this thing happening that a lot of people experience, and from that experience they might or might not have a visual bond, or they might have some affective like parallel experiences to other people and perhaps form community from that or not, but that it's not, the deployment of images no longer becomes something that you necessarily can control with intention. Somebody like KKW clearly can be more intentional about it, but I think that what Dean speaks to is something that has less deliberateness.
I see there's a lot of interesting things happening in the chat also. I see Cortland Bird wrote, last year in an interview with Brooklyn Rail, Steyerl was asked again about a poor image and stated, 12 or 15 years ago, I thought there would be some kind of redemption or at least pleasure in dealing with these materials. But I think the overall situation with the internet has changed to a point where basically everything can be weaponized immediately. So I think that the innocence of the glitch and the imperfect image is very much lost at this point. I am no longer working with this material. I mean, it sounds so negative and depressing, but I still found something hopeful out of this. Maybe Cortland, do you want to jump in, or David, did you?
Oh, sorry. I mean, thank you, Cortland, for posting that. That's a wonderful quote that I think sheds a lot of situation. I think that was kind of a feeling I was having when I was like, originally read this, 11 or 12 years ago. I was like really into zines and like having VHS tapes of, art pieces and really all this underground poor image stuff. And then as it grows into this kind of weaponized internet culture, it is not it doesn't bond a small intimate group in a kind of fun romantic way. It's kind of terrifying. I mean, someone, Christine mentions here in the chat that kind of Trump's, tweet memes are a kind of poor image, kind of assault on the culture, using kind of the medium to spread these ideas really quickly. Nando, I see you have your hand raised, or if Cortland, if you want to jump in and follow up with.
Oh yeah, just briefly. I had read that, and I recalled, I think in some of the things that you were saying, David, that that quote that she sort of walked back what she had said about the poor image. But I agree, Liz, as well, that I actually still really love this article, like even though it is dated. I think that maybe the walking back of it doesn't have to be so negative. It more just has to do with sort of the realization that now, like, the poor images at one point, like, maybe there was a hope in it, but like now they're being weaponized too. So just sort of the realization of like not only like high definition stuff, but like low definition stuff is in the mainstream and being used by everybody once again. So maybe it's lost a little bit of its revolutionary potential. You just have to be like careful about how these things are being used or how you're using them. So I thought that was an interesting consideration, that she had written this and then kind of had to rethink it. So anyways.
Nando, what were you thinking?
Bear with me, I'm working on dinner here. But the question of what is the job of an image, I would kind of like roll into like, what is the job of an artist? And I feel like Dean does a really good job of addressing her own ambivalence as to whether these images can actually be liberatory. And I teach the Steyerl piece in most of my classes, and we always get to memes, which is awesome, but then also students trying to use the aesthetics of a poor image as artists, and then it just becomes art and has lost its any power it had through those aesthetics and bonds. And I guess another question is like, can artists truly participate in this economy as artists, or is it just as says the real, and somehow the art world is kind of to quite touch the real?
Yeah, I mean, I see what you're saying, and I think we're all kind of maybe coming to this place where you read that article and you're sort of rooting for the poor image, and you see its revolutionary potential, perhaps, but you also quickly begin to feel that like maybe it's not your revolution, right? Maybe it's not your ideology, that this kind of really kind of a dissemination mechanism that Cheryl's describing is, you might not be on the winning team when it's all kind of falls out.
Yeah,
Catherine, I was going to say, Catherine Zermowski's just posted a comment about Cheryl and Benjamin that I think looks really interesting. Do you want to share that thought, Catherine? Or, I can just read the comment. Cheryl evokes Walter Benjamin in her essay, and I think there is a similar sense of political possibility and one of fascism that emerges from a similar place.
maybe we can group this into a question from earlier from Christine Lawrence. When we think about the kind of community that forms around memes and feeds on them to grow larger, wouldn't that describe the kind of meme culture that succeeded so much in promoting the current president? Would those memes then be successful images? Well, I mean, like in terms of like, there is no, these are like tools, like in the same way, when I was an art student, you get to watch a film by Leni Riefenstahl, Triumph of Will, and you get to read Walter Benjamin's text about the revolutionary potential of mechanical reproduction. But I think written into both texts are the anxieties and the threats that is inherent to the medium, right? Like the sort of the prey of the easy prey that these images become to the will of a savvy marketer, or so I do think that there's like an inherent danger in all of these, and I think sort of the walking back that Hito Steyerl does is like, well, yeah, it's a recognition of a potential threat that was already sort of acknowledged, written into the text that she wrote in as early as 2007.
I think that's really interesting too. And to follow up, I just want to read Stu Chandler's quote where he says, I think this is related, isn't accessibility an important element of an image and indeed the work of an artist? And, as I'm thinking through this question of accessibility in the poor image, I'm sort of wondering if, this kind of uniting potential of the poor image, right? I guess my question is like, is it supposed to be accessible to everyone, right? Is more accessibility like sort of evidence of a better, more powerful image? Or is it supposed to be like when I think about a successful meme, it's not really necessarily supposed to be understood by everyone in the world. It's supposed to be understood by the cool people, right? It's supposed to be like, if everyone gets the joke, then perhaps the joke isn't so powerful or so important. And it's like, if the people who are sort of in the know about whatever the issue is understand its meaning, and you share your phone and someone else is like, what does that mean? I don't even get it. Like that sort of reinforces the power of the poor image. And to an extent, if it becomes accessible to too wide of an audience, it's sort of becomes watered down, maybe. Do you think am I following that thinking right with what maybe more what Dean is talking about in terms of a cultural uniting potential?
I definitely think so. I mean, others feel free to chime in, especially Jill, as you were referencing Dean's article more closely. But you know, she evokes people like Fred Moten and Edward Glissant, who talk about either the undercommons or opacity as the refuge from sort of that kind of all encompassing, all like logic of capitalism and power. And you know, there needs to be, yeah, the certain memes, and like you were talking about, speak to a specific group of people, and you're outside of it sometimes, you're inside of it sometimes.
I'm gonna, oh,
Yeah,
sorry, go ahead, Jillian.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say, I think in terms of accessibility, I think that word in particular, accessibility, kind of gives different connotation, kind of individualist, and what kind of the individual more in terms interpret, as opposed to inclusive, which is meant for the entire community to then be involved and be able to understand and read the language of it. But I do think that inclusivity is important element of an image as opposed to accessibility, because then it really gives way for everyone, quote unquote, everyone, to be able to understand it and read the image closer, as opposed to access, which kind of gives notion that there needs to be some sort of preemptive context to be understood before you can interpret that image. So I think it can be very touch and go, because then that also opens up access to different levels of community as well, because you're then able to interpret and understand the communication processes that happens within those. So I think that kind of bears more relevance for certain groups, some that are more marginalized and has been historically disenfranchised, because some of that language and communication styles can then be co-opted and used as a form of violence. So I think that it is important that there needs to be a level of respectability when kind of talking about accessibility into certain elements, or being able to understand certain elements of an image as well. So I hope that answers your question.
I mean, it certainly does, and leads to other thoughts, as I'm sure it does for other people. But I wanted to just kind of highlight Allison Grant's comment, kind of going back a little bit, but I think still related. Or Allison, do you want to kind of chime in with your thought? I can, old friend.
Sure, it's good to see you, David, and everyone. I just wonder if at this point, you know, meme culture is just a part of culture, and the poor image is just become normalized to the point where it's no longer radical, where, you know, whatever radical potential it had. I mean, I kind of relate this to punk rock, I guess, because punk rock used to be this like radical grunge culture, and then it was taken up by commercial culture. I mean, there's so many examples of this throughout history, but I'm just using that because of its grimy relationship to the poor image. And you know, it sort of loses its power once it becomes a part of the masses, and it becomes this force for capitalist ideology. And I just sort of think that Steyerl's piece does feel really dated, because it was about a time maybe when memes, I don't know, it's so hard because history is such a blur, like my, you know, things you live through kind of blur together, but I feel like it seemed radical when the first read it, and then when I reread it, I was like, well, yeah, that's what images do. They're just, poor images are images.
Yeah, and right. There, you know, not to go down a totally different rabbit hole, but I think there is also a conversation here about authenticity, and you know, so many of these things, like, you know, punk rock, like you were mentioning, or other things, right? Like, their kind of viral power is that they kind of hit you as feeling authentic for some reason or another, whether they are or not. And it's maybe the people who are really in with the in-group know their true authentic potential. But, you know, I think maybe poor image sometimes is a shorthand for like true image or authentic image, or something that's, you know, equally undefinable.
Well, yeah, and I think humor and irony are important there too, because things can feel authentic when they're funny because we feel them on a sort of gut level. We're just sort of like, oh, there's a truth. That was hilarious. That resonates with me. And it can sometimes mask, I think, those sort of darker things that are beneath it. So I think it's important to be very sort of aware of that type of creation.
I guess I am also thinking about what exactly is at stake, right? Like, it's kind of related to like, what is the job of an image? Like, what is the intention? I see a question from Sean Carroll. Is meme, sorry, I don't mean to, but like I feel like it's kind of Sean, please feel free to jump in. I think about your question and I'm thinking about, you know, why, like what is at stake, what is the job, what is the purpose of, you know, of these images. So please feel free to jump in with your question.
I'll read Sean's.
Oh, okay.
Sean, you're mute.
Oh, I think. Oh, Sean was speaking, but he was muted.
Sorry, sorry about that. Just in response to what the last caller was talking about, is meme culture a thing? And just the idea that, and this is referring to all sorts of, you know, anybody can write anything and take a picture of anything and immediately upload it and show it to everybody everywhere at the same time, regardless of the quality of the content at any one time. And like, what are the implications of that? And I think, you know, I think we're experiencing that right now on a cultural and political level, that everybody can say whatever they want, whenever they want, write it down and share it to everybody in the whole world that has a device. And how do we parse that, you know, as a culture? I don't know the answer, but that's what I think about every day right now.
I would also kind of tacked on to the end of that to go just a tad bit further. It's not only that everyone can kind of upload what they want, is that it could also be seen as valid in certain groups, even if it is like, you know, undisputably wrong. So I think that is something that's also very important to think about, because it kind of acts as a great equalizer of whose voice, which can be incredible in some instances, but it can also be incredibly harmful in others. And I think that kind of also ties into who's able to be seen as valid within the larger cultural conversation and kind of the conventions that are already present within how we interact with each other and like how an image is presented to us as well.
I was just reading a question in the chat that I think is really interesting to me from Michelle E., who writes, do you think individual anonymity
anonymity
plays a role?
We can all take a turn saying that word.
Yeah, thank you, David. I had to check the spelling.
But tell me what you mean by that, because I think that's really fascinating.
So, I mean, I just see sometimes anonymity and in how people can respond doesn't have an impact. Like in this environment, you see my face, there's accountability, or in person, but anonymity, you know, guarantee, I don't know. That's why I'm asking the question, because I mean, sometimes you see an environment, quote unquote, like blow up because people can say all kinds of things without a repercussion of accountability or responsibility for what's said, either about an image or accompanying an image, right? And a subculture. So when a whole, you know, thing evolves around an image, sometimes it doesn't have a known owner or an artist, which in some cases is great. There are anonymous artists, right? But I'm just wondering if, you know, this, especially around the conversation of a meme, builds into something because there's a population that can comment anonymously. It's just a thought.
Well, and thinking through to our examples, right? You know, Liz showed a work that has a creator who sort of organized, but the images themselves are fairly anonymous, right? You would be hard pressed to find any of the names of the photographers who took the images. the image Jill presented has a clear creator who's a sort of subject and creator for the image. And I think of the dress image as anonymous to me in the sense of like, I don't know or care where it came from. It exists as a product of a cultural moment and not as something anyone made. But
I guess I was going where I was going, that when an image becomes viral, so to speak, and we all know about it, how did it get there? I mean, just anecdotally without data, it seems a lot of times it's promoted by an anonymous connection.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is.
Can I say something about that?
Oh, sure.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't interrupt you.
No, go ahead, Allison.
Oh, I just wanted to say that I think it's such an interesting question. And, you know, one of the things that's really dangerous about memes, because a lot of times they're made by anonymous people, but then they're used by people who are not anonymous when they're using them. And so I've seen instances where people have mistakenly, you know, put a racist meme, for example, up, not realizing, you know, the film taken from or the sort of context it was ripped from. And, you know, that's really upsetting and devastating to accidentally do something like that. And so, I don't know, it's just sort of interesting how it becomes a sort of shorthand language, and the anonymity sometimes gets reassigned. It decides to, you know, forward it down the sort of popularity chain.
Yeah, it makes me think about how the First Amendment gets used and abused. I want to bring in Benjamin Ogrodnik's comment. Ben, are you there? Do you want to jump in and share your comment?
Hey, how's it going? Yeah, I don't have much to say about memes, but with respect to poor images, I think that certain artists and collectives have used poor images in very political ways. So I cited like the forensic architecture, which is like a multidisciplinary group based in London, but basically they gather like crowdsourced camera footage or photographs or home video footage, and then they try to gather that data together and create models of situations of violence where you know, different governments or police agencies will claim, you know, certain individuals brought violence on themselves. Forensic architecture, in an almost like quasi-heroic way, will come in and say, look at all these images, these poor images that we've curated that show an alternative state of affairs or something. I think that's like maybe a silver lining of where poor images and their multiplicity, their accessibility, their virality could have positive effects. I'm not really sure as far as the meme direction of things goes, if there's any redemptive quality there, but like, what's interesting though is that the forensic architecture group has to really analyze and like present context, where the free floating poor image wouldn't have any kind of authority on its own. Like you actually need someone to come in and say, I've looked at like hundreds of different images. This is where they all come from. These are the individuals who authored them. So I don't know, I'm reminded a little bit of like Susan Sontag and what she said about photography. One of her concerns about photography was that without a caption, the image can mean anything. And I think in a similar way, there's like a Sontagian concern I have about poor images where like if you don't have a context or a caption, you can, you know, find deep fakes or fabricated truths through poor images that are circulated in unsavory communities.
Yeah, I think you're describing the exact opposite of how you know, the anonymous floating in the example that you were giving, which I find that these are really productive counterpoints. You know, you have the people who are sort of engaged in these like free floating images, and then you have people who are 100% about accountability and tracking down information. And you know, this I guess too is part of the digital landscape and the physical reality, that these coexist in this pool of images. There's a lot of other questions in the chat. Anybody want to jump in?
Well, if no one will jump in, I can share my next thought, which is, and I think maybe some of the things that in the chat are kind of getting at this, which is a different kind of poor image that we haven't addressed, but maybe Ben is getting to them. And I think perhaps one we've all been thinking about a lot this summer, which are, you know, sort of citizen cell phone videos of violence, right? Especially police violence as a example of a poor image with enormous distribution and kind of cultural impact and potential. And, you know, perhaps if they do affect change, maybe do warrant some of these, Cheryl's kind of optimistic, you know, former optimistic attitude.
Can we address the optimism for a little bit? because I feel like that there is this sort of desire to use images as a way to sort of inspire. And you know, you can think of everything from like this cheesy motivational poster to you know, like a heroic film, but like the sense of optimism in an image, I think is sort of what lends itself to, I guess, its own kind of pitfall. And I find this like position of sort of eschewing the previous optimism really interesting. And, you know, we all find ourselves on a good day. We all find ourselves on a bad day. And I think that the idea of a collectivity that an image coalesces is still important, no matter like how scary right-wing it is, or no matter like whether it's for a revolutionary purpose. I think that there is kind of a quality in how an image collectivizes. And I think, you know, thinking about artists who are good at sort of doing that, I wonder if it's like a matter of a scale, a matter of like sustaining that sentiment over a longer period of time.
You know, thinking about that, and also about these groups and the uniting. I'm just reading a little bit up in the chat, and there's someone, I don't know if I'm saying this right, but Glauco, who's talking about the relationship between the image makers and the image consumers, and this idea that these images we're talking about are, you know, kind of related to that idea of anonymity, but you know, that they're being made by a really, really small sort of subsection of the population and being consumed so widely, I think is important too. Are you around?
Yeah, I'm here. Let me turn my video on. Yeah, no, so it was just that that point I wanted to make, because I feel like the other day I just had to deal with my mom and how she like gets memes on her phone, and she kind of doesn't know where they come from, and it's this sort of thing of like really accepting it. Like we're very ready to accept, but we don't know where it comes from, and as we all said before, that just is kind of scary in a way. So I was thinking about it, like, I don't personally know anyone who makes memes and who actually like does the work of, so it really kind of feels like it sort of springs out of nowhere, and therefore it sort of feels much, I think it has a power to kind of get to us very much, much easier, because we don't have this sort of like the face of the person as it was said before. Yeah, so that's kind of my.
That's I think that's really interesting, and maybe to tag onto that, you know, the difference between maker and consumer. Eve Bauer has a comment here talking about the importance of the sharer, the sort of new role, right? The person who further disseminates the image, and thinking about Mammy Till's image. Eve, are you around? Do you want to kind of follow up on your comment? I think that's really interesting.
Hi, yes. So I'm a journalist, and I work in TV news, and we're having this conversation a lot, as we've heard more and more that these videos are traumatic, and many in our audience perceive them as needing more transparent justification when we air them. And that's a conversation that we weren't aware of. Maybe it was happening, but we weren't aware of it 7 years ago, 6 years ago, 5 years ago. It feels like something that's very quickly become much more prominent. But the Emmett Till image and the sharing with Time magazine is almost always the reference. People internally will say, like within the news organization will say, we can't sit on this. We can't keep it from the public. What about Emmett Till? Emmett Till is what catalyzed the movement. And it's hard to argue that the video of George Floyd didn't catalyze what happened this summer. But it's also impossible to pretend that it's something that can be handled without great intention and without very careful thought about the consequences.
Totally
Yeah.
agree.
Yes, I mean, especially in these cases of images of violence, where, you know, who has the right to share them, or what is the need or the urgency to share them. Maybe to change gears a little bit, Melissa Catanese has a really interesting take on our conversation about optimism, and maybe I think you're right, Melissa. Maybe we are reading it wrong. Do you want to talk about your thought? No. Okay. You know, but
I guess I'm not, I don't know, I have stage fright. So, I think for me, the takeaway was Steyerl was talking about the where, the how, like, and the what, right? This kind of low resolution in this venue, right? The medium, this kind of channel, but not really about the how or the why, where I think I was happy to read the Dean essay because I felt like she was talking more about the why and the how. I guess that's all I'll have to say about that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think that's why I think Aria Dean's article is so powerful, because she adds agency. She goes back to the who, like, who is this for? Who is this not for? And it does feel like we have less and less agency, and I guess that's related to optimism. My sense of optimism, that I want to cling on to the hope that there is some agency that we have as people participating in an image world. But I do think that that this address of who, it's so fractured, because like Glocko was also saying, like images seem to appear out of nowhere, and there's this sort of weird sense of anonymity, and then it gets usurped and it gets reappropriated, re-edited, remixed, and like where's the subject in those sentences to these verbs, right? So I totally agree with you. I don't know, is anybody else feeling less or more optimistic?
I'm feeling kind of medium. I was actually, I could call on Jillian for a second. I noticed there's a thread going on about a Trump boat parade, and this is kind of a meme thing I kind of missed, and it seems to have some application to this conversation, but I know a couple people are going forth, but could you sort of kind of summarize that case study and what you're thinking about with it?
OMG, of course, I'd love to. So there has been a plethora, I think that's the only word I could really use to describe it, of Trump-based boat rallies taking place across the country as a means of kind of circumventing the social distancing order while also showing support for a political candidate. And I don't know if it's just like karma or just life or just saying maybe this is not a good idea, but there has been a ton of kind of disruptions in those plans, whether in terms of that be due to weather or people not following protocol and safety. And I think that just the images coming out from these events are just, they're ironic in kind of the worst possible way. Like you see people essentially on these very overpacked boats on very rough waters, not abiding by safety protocols, and just the images coming out from these events just kind of show and are very embellic of kind of like the Trump presidency in itself, which is kind of a mess. And then kind of the other side of this is then there has been numerous parodies and offsprings of kind of these boat shows and the sinkings of these boats in the forms of social media memes that are popping up on Twitter and Facebook and the such. And one particular meme is actually it is a GIF of a boat that is on fire. That was one of the ones that I noticed. It's almost engulfed in flame and it's on fire, and it has a Trump 2020 banner that is superimposed via Photoshop. And that incident just to me is just like, wow, if there's just any more clear way that just kind of shows how something that is completely unrelated in terms of like US politics and US governance is kind of summarily shown as an image in these mass boat sinkings, I guess. And I think one particular event that is happening is a boat show that's taking place on Lake Lanier in Georgia. And if anyone is unfamiliar with Lake Lanier in Georgia, it's essentially, it has a local I guess, assumption of being cursed, essentially, because Lake Lanier was a man-made lake in which there are numerous towns and cities that reside underneath it that was dug up in about, I want to say, 1900 to 1920. And one of the significant things about this is that, thank you, Emily. She dropped in the Know Your Meme of the Trump boat on Lake Travelers, but the Lake Lanier boat parade is even just a little bit worse because it kind of is, they say that a lot of these unrested spirits of people that were in that city and in those towns kind of disturb those waters. So there are numerous drownings and boat sinkings that take place on Lake Lanier, but people still go to it. So just the image of the Trump boat rally taking place on Lake Lanier, there has been a lot of memes as well coming out of specifically Black Twitter about how Lake Lanier and the ancestors are getting ready to just eat them up. So I think that that's very interesting, and how there's a form of kind of therapy also happening in the form of image making for Black people and Black Twitter happening right now. And just kind of how that also lumps back into like who are allowed to make memes and who are allowed to laugh at memes and who aren't allowed to enjoy them. I think that just kind of framing it that way, kind of the incidents of happening of like the boat parades and like, I guess what I'm trying to say is who really gets to enjoy the meme and who gets to laugh at the meme and who gets to feel offended by the meme. Because to me, that's kind of funny in a super ironic way, but a lot of people justifiably can be offended by those memes in the same token because people are in danger and people are getting injured. So I think that it's a very interesting kind of energies that are happening with those particular events.
I guess my experience was that I saw an artist share one. This is an artist, Deborah or Apollo. So the boat that was underwater, I thought it was an image that she had made. She often works with poor images. It was made, it was shared. So I reshared it. And then I thought it was something she had made. So I'm having conversations and then it's kind of going viral. And I'm like, maybe this isn't an image that this artist had made. And it's just a real image, but I couldn't tell because it was a poor image. Then it becomes a meme. And I didn't know. So the origin, the sharing, the maker, it felt like and it was the first time I felt like I was in it and perpetuating it and trying to answer questions about an image. And I loved the image, but I thought it was artistically made and not just a real image. So thank you for clearing up some of that. I guess I need to go use Know Your Meme.
I think the fundamental point point to this conversation is something that Biff has commented on in the chat. The power of photography has often rested on its ability to reproduce in a faithful manner, like what is in front of the camera. So like this idea of depicting reality, that's traditionally the understanding of a photograph. And this manipulation, memes and poor images, it kind of takes us away from, it makes us question, right? That sort of the promise of photography. Biff, do you want to jump in with any further comments or questions, thoughts?
Yeah, I'm working on it. Okay, there. Yeah, I half my comment. I hit return too quickly. But that illusion of truth that photography has always had is what allows, I think, these memes to gain momentum and spread, because people see images and their instinct is to believe them, even though I think that they maybe never have been true. They're always, just by the act of cropping the image, you've excluded information to direct the image where you want it to be, or to direct the recipient to believe what you want them to believe. So I think that, but as a photographer, you learn to question that sort of automatically, but I think the general public accepts it because that's the way they use imagery. So that the photographic imagery can be accessed by different people in different manners based on their sort of history with the medium. Everybody's familiar with photographs, but not everybody understands photographs. It's just like, some people write better than others. Some people speak better than others, and some people read images better than others. And there's a desire to, and maybe it goes to the optimism content question, but there's a desire to believe what you see, because you want to believe, you want to know that something is solid out there.
Yeah, the gap between reality and what is in front of you. I mean, we have all sorts of qualifiers when we post things on Instagram, #NoFilter.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
There's always a filter.
Yeah.
Exactly. Absolutely. Ben, did you have a thought on how we can maybe approach this this filtered reality?
I wish I had an answer, but I don't. I find it interesting that the last paragraph of Steyerl's article calls for this really sophisticated way of reading poor images, of like thinking about the images in terms of swarm circulation, digital dispersion, fractured and flexible temporalities. And these are the real conditions of existence for poor images. And like, I just don't know who thinks about those things when we look at memes or, I don't know, shocking, you know, camera phone footage. I mean, all these questions are really, really important, but like, as the last speaker was just saying, like, I think part of the romance of visual culture is like resisting like a hyper rationalistic, you know, approach where you are only thinking about the context. What about what's wrong with the thing itself? It's weird. I think that she ends with this like opposition of, you know, what we want in images, but then their reality. I don't know.
Yeah. There's contradictions already embedded in it.
Right, and Ben, you know, in your comment where you're sort of saying, you know, how often do we reflect on circulation and dispersion and all that, you know, how often do we sort of critically reflect on the poor images we're inundated with every day, and probably not that often, and probably it's unrealistic to, you know, I think sometimes we think of ourselves as being as wanting to aspire to be more critical of images more of the time. But I also think that just feels unrealistically exhausting because the torrent of images is so unrelenting.
I think that's a good segue to introduce our next topic for our second session: excess of photographs, the torrent of images, the endless scroll, you know, the infinite scroll, which is actually like a technical term on building a web page. Shall we make a closing announcement and let everybody know that we are continuing with our second session, October?
Yeah, so if I can if I can pull this up. So I just want to say thank you all so much. This was honestly, this was more than I could have hoped for with this discussion. I just love reading through everyone's comments and listening to everyone's ideas. I mean, this kind of discourse around photography is something I've really been missing around the pandemic since the gallery's been closed. So just from the bottom of my heart, thank you all for you know, participating in this with us. And so we're going to keep doing this, and I really hope you'll come back. Our topic 2 is excess of photographs, and that will be facilitated by Dan Leers, who's the curator of photography at the Carnegie Museum of Art, who I think has been working with some really interesting artists along that vein. So really come back. That is Tuesday, October 6th, and that'll also be at 5:30. I also just wanted to mention there's a form on our website where you can continue to leave a comment or really I think what I would appreciate is any feedback from anyone about how to, you know, again, this is our first time running a big Zoom session with at some points like 85 people in it. So, you know, any feedback on what was working in this session or what we could try to do something different, we're really open to whatever makes this a interesting and engaging session. And or any comments on the upcoming readings, sort of some questions or comments to prime the pump for the next discussion on October 6th. So thank you so much, Liz, Jillian, Emily, Kate, Leo, and everyone for coming. I really, this really warms my photo nerd heart to be here with you guys doing this. I had a great time. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.